Hey everyone! Today I am walking you through my newest brush set for Procreate, and it's called Pattern Reveal Brushes. This set has 81 pressure reactive brushes designed specifically for experimental collage artists or anyone who just loves playing with color, texture, and pattern. So these brushes work differently than normal pattern brushes. A normal pattern brush would usually lay down a pattern in a uniform way and fade out on the edges. And while there's nothing wrong with that, these pattern brushes are different in that the pattern itself actually builds and reveals more and more detail the more that you press with your Apple Pencil. So each pattern brush is actually like a couple of different patterns all in the same brush, depending on how much pressure that you use. So let's go ahead and demo some of these brushes so that I can explain what I mean. So let me just turn this off and make a new layer. And inside of the Pattern Reveal brush set, I'm just going to start out with this brush from the top section, which is the ornamental section, called EXO, just to give you kind of an idea of what I'm talking about here. So when I press lightly with my Apple Pencil, basically I get a grid of dots. I'm using very light pressure right now. And I've started to press a little bit more, and you can see that more dots are filling in, and that middle dot is getting a little bit bigger. So now I'm going to increase my pressure again, and we start to get even more detail to the pattern. So we're getting this nice little X in the middle. And now I'm increasing my pressure and everything becomes a lot more filled out. And I'm still increasing my pressure, and there are some lines that start to appear. Continuing to increase my pressure, and then we get the whole pattern much more filled out like this. So you'll notice that it's not the opacity that is changing with pressure, it's the actual brush details. So we started out with just plain dots, we got more and more detail and even more as we continued increasing the pressure. And that's how all of these brushes work, with multiple levels of pressure and detail coming out with that pressure. So let's have a look at another one. Let's go with this one called Illumination. So again, we'll start out with minimal pressure, and we just get this sort of plus sign with some dots around it, right? And now we're increasing pressure a little bit, and something starts to appear here. And we get a much more sort of interesting pattern coming out here. And I'm still using about medium pressure right now. So let's just increase that a little bit. So I'm increasing the pressure, the pattern fills out more, and let's increase even more. And this line starts to appear between the different sections, and then this motif here is coming out. So let's look at one more here called Dotty Deco Stripe, and I'm just trying to show you the different kinds of brushes that are included here. So starting out with light pressure, we just have some dots and shapes here, and increasing that pressure, the dots get thicker, and we start to get more shapes, and they start to actually connect on this stripe here. And increasing the pressure even more, we start to get a really interesting stripy pattern here. So here's where it gets really fun for layering, because these patterns are built with pressure so that you can paint using the same brush in different colors with different pressures. And what you get is this rich multicolored effect. So let's have a look. Let's choose a different color. I've been using this sort of like salmon pink here. Let's maybe go with yellow. And we haven't changed the size of the brush. So what happens if we go on top of this using light pressure? We're actually adding this sort of like what we had over here on top of this. And this is all in the same layer. And you can just kind of go around using different colors like this. And let's say that we want to add something underneath of this, because if we go over top of that, it's just going to erase what's in the layer, which is maybe what we want for, like light pattern on top like this. But if we want to make a new layer, we can put that below, and then we can use more pressure like this to actually show through. And what if we did that again? Let's choose that one. And used even more pressure like this. So this is what I did with all of these different patterns on the cover here. I did all of these with a couple of layers on top or below and pressing harder or lighter with different colors until we got this really fun multicolored effect. So let's just turn that off and have a closer look at all of the different categories within the brush set. So the brushes that we have been working with so far are in a category called Ornamental. And this brush set has 6 categories. We've got Ornamental, we've got Floral, Celestial, Geometric, Circular, and Organic. So all 80 of these brushes work the same way with the pressure that I was just showing you. There are more details come out depending on how much pressure you are using, and you can use all of them for layering with color the way that I've done on the cover and the way that I just showed you. So they're grouped by theme so that you can navigate more easily because there are 80 in here. So I wanted to make it a bit easier to navigate. So they're all pretty abstract and decorative though, just because that is the nature of this brush set, and don't feel limited by the categories. You can mix and match as much as you want to. So let's just start by demoing a few more of the ornamental brushes. So basically I've named these ornamental because they are decorative and they're kind of defying category, a lot of these, but they all work exactly the same way. So this is light pressure, and increasing the pressure, this motif becomes a bit more filled out, and increasing the pressure more, then we start to get a circle pattern coming out. And then with a lot of pressure, this is the solid pattern. So let's look at a few more. This one's called Wayfinder. This is light pressure, increasing the pressure, we get some dots, and more of the pattern starts to come out with more of the pressure. This one kind of makes me think of a Demogorgon a little bit, if you're familiar with Stranger Things. I've been watching that with my kids. Anyway, so some of the brushes have an outline like this. So this is like a snowflake outline. And then as you use more pressure, you get more details coming out there, but then also the outline starts to fill in like that. And this is really useful for layering. For instance, if we chose another color here, then we have the outline in a different color than the middle of the leaf there. And by doing layers on top versus underneath, you just get something different. So this is where I drew in the lighter color on top, and this is where I drew in the lighter color in a layer underneath. Moving on, let's just demo a few more of the brushes here. Next up, we've got the floral section. There are garden motifs, botanicals, flowers, and just anything that gave me a floral feel, even if they're not specifically floral. So for instance, we've got our starry floral grid, and that, starts out with this really basic flower, which turns into a flower and a star with more pressure, like this. And then we get some lines in there with even more pressure. Again, these are really fun for layering. And some of the things like this star that pop up with more pressure, you can actually do those in the bottom layer. And something important to know is when you're layering colors like this, if you change the size of the brush, then it's not going to work anymore because the pattern scales with the brush. So while you're doing this layering, it's just important to keep the brush the same size as you're doing it. So just having a look at some of the other brushes in the floral section. This one turns into more detailed flowers as we go, and even more detail. And then with more pressure, suddenly it becomes this really interesting floral pattern here. And this is one of my personal favorites, and you'll probably see that on the product page as well. But it's got these pills and flowers, and they just kind of like bounce into this really interesting pattern with more pressure. So moving on, we've got the Celestial section, and let me just choose a color that's a bit more appropriate. So we've got a lot of stars that kind of pop out a bit more with pressure. This is one of my personal favorites, this one, because the levels of pressure are just really detailed. So there's a bit more, and there we go. We've also got a lot of different types of stars with fun little sort of hand-drawn detail like this. This is one of my favorites here. Let me just make that a bit bigger so you can really see what's going on. I've called it Encircled Star. And so this is little pressure, using more and more and more, and suddenly the star has a circle around it. And I just love watching that happen underneath of the pen. It's just really cool when that pops out. So we don't really have time to look at absolutely all of these, but let's just look at a few more. Moving on, we've got the Geometric section. So this is probably the first type of brush that I made in this whole pattern reveal type of brush. This is where I discovered it. I was making halftone brushes for my Mid-Century Magic brush set, which I made previously, and I sort of discovered that you can actually go from dots to a grid, and that's all well and fun, but you can even press a bit harder and get a grid going in the completely opposite direction. So this is kind of the brush itself where I just kind of discovered this whole concept, and I was just so excited by this concept. I just found it really fun and really interesting that, you know, you can go from 3 different levels. Basically, you can go from the dots or like little stars into a grid, and then pressing harder, something else entirely can just appear like that. So anyway, a lot of the different brushes in this geometric section are kind of built on a similar concept of just building a geometric pattern little by little, layer by layer with pressure. And this one is a really fun one. Let me just choose a different color. Let's go with orange. So it just looks like kind of rows of boxes without a lot of pressure. And then as you start to use more pressure, then they actually become 3D boxes like this. Now we've got this laid out like this. We can add a new layer, put that underneath, and then we can make the bottom part a different color. So let's go with pink. And moving on in the geometric section, we've got some more brushes that kind of build like this. This is probably one of my personal favorites as well. I call this one Pinwheel Grid. We've also got some stripes in here, and I've called it liquid stripe because it just has kind of like this liquid sort of feeling to it. And you can mix and match colors here as well, even though there's not like new details coming out. But I wanted to include this because the concept is very much the same as all the other brushes in this set. And moving on, we've got the circular section, and basically anything involving circles, I put those into this section. So just kind of showing you a few of these as well. And finally, we've got the organic section. And this one I've named organic just because it feels more like sketchy and is more based on sort of patterns that I've hand drawn. But again, we've got the same concept where more detail is showing up with more pressure. So for instance, these map lines, we've got new lines appearing with more pressure. This one I've called Rainy Day, and more of these dots start to appear with more pressure, like this. We've got some stripes as well, where they're very sparse, and then they're getting more and more, like that. And lastly, it is February, so here are some hearts at the very end. And these start out as an outline and then they fill in. So once again, let's just look at the layering techniques. You can add the pattern to collages, for instance, and just use one color and vary the pattern within that one color, like that. Or you can add color on top of the pattern like this and mix and match, and you can do all of that within the same layer if you so choose. And the way that this is working is because I have not changed the size of the brush. So as long as we keep the size of the brush the same, we can always keep layering color like this. And another thing we can do is add a layer below, and then we can have, again, without changing the size of the pattern, we can have it peeking out from underneath. And that's really useful if you kind of have something that you're happy with on the top layer, but you just want a bit more depth underneath of it. So using layers is not entirely necessary, but it can help you sort of fit more color into it. And when you're done, you can always just merge those together. So I've been alluding to this for a while, but something important to note and to remember is that the brush size changes the scale of the pattern. So you can see the pattern itself scaling up and down here. So for instance, the pattern is really small like this, and then it gets a lot bigger with the size change. So this can change the way that it looks if you're working within the same canvas, but also you can work with large canvases and small canvases as well in this way. And because of this feature, this is why in order to do this layering technique, we just don't change the size of the brush there. And as long as we don't change that until we're done with the color layering, then it's always going to be the same size. But something else to note is that if you're tilting your canvas like this, then the pattern is always going to be oriented up and down. And this is done on purpose so that you can decide if you want the pattern to turn a certain way, then you can just turn your canvas. But it's just important to note that if you're turning your canvas, then you can't, even if the brush size is the same, then you can't do the color blending like that either. Something else that is fun that you might want to try is changing blend modes. So we don't really have that going on now, but if I turn on the bottom layer and then this top layer, if we go to this N here and we start to kind of change the blend mode, you can see that you can get some really interesting blending properties by trying out some different blend modes here. And this is really useful for collage as well. And so it's something I want to encourage you to experiment with and to just kind of see how many more options you can have from doing that. I also just want to make a note about the color palettes that are included with the purchase of this brush set. So this Pattern Reveal color palette here is just colors that I like, that I feel like work well with the brush set. You can use whatever colors that you want, of course, but these are the colors that I've used, for instance, on the cover. And I just feel like these patterns work really well with bright colors and like contrasting colors in order to really show these details really nicely. So that's what this Pattern Reveal color palette is. It's just sort of like the flagship color palette that goes with this. But I've got a couple other options as well. So we've got Pure Dopamine, and that's just neons basically, because again, I think these work really well with bright colors. If you want something a bit more grown up and sophisticated, we've got this one, and then we've also got these pastels as well. And these are all just suggestions. You can use whatever colors that you want to and experiment with that. So that is Pattern Reveal. 81 pressure reactive Procreate brushes and 4 color palettes, all designed for experimental and playful artwork. So what can you make with these? Honestly, there are so many possibilities. You can use them as decorative elements in digital collages or abstract compositions. You can create backgrounds for art journaling or anything else. You can mix them with all kinds of other brush sets like mixed media or lettering for more complex artwork. If you have any questions, you're very welcome to email me, or you can tag me if you want to. You don't have to, but you can tag me on social media if you want. And I've also just turned on the YouTube community page here on my channel, so you're very welcome to post there as well if you want to. The key is just to experiment. These brushes are made for playing and experimenting, so just start layering, vary your pressure, mix the colors, add a layer here and there. Just let the patterns surprise you and hopefully delight you. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.